that have a pretty good bandwidth of 500 megabits.
Professor, I had a quick question about the project, if you don't mind taking one right now.
Oh, something quick.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about how do we find which TA we are supposed to report to for the project?
Oh, yeah, no. So the TAs is gonna set up days that they're available during the week, and you can go to any TA. So they're gonna share like a spreadsheet, and you can, you're just gonna grab a time slot with whatever TA, with whatever.
So we can just go to any TA meeting and tell them that.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, the TA should be making that available soon. All right, let's see who else was here. Let me share my screen. I can't really see my screen.
Yes, Professor.
All right, so let's minimize this. Let's put the chat here on the side. Okay. All right, let's get started. Let's see. So we're getting started with week number 10. Let's see. Let's take a look at our syllabus. All right. So I guess. Wait, no. I'm sorry. Week 11. Week 11. So yeah. So we're going to be start to talk about Node.js. We have been we've explored the idea of creating our own servers and connecting it to a database. The server that we've implemented so far is using a Java server where we can create web services. We create a service that can manipulate the data, and then we have a controller that can interact with the incoming HTTP requests. And then we went on and connected that server to a database using JPA, which is an ORM solution, object relational application, which can take a Java data model and convert it into a relational data model. So the last 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, we have been talking about creating our own server, connecting to a database. We're going to repeat the exact same thing, but instead of using Java as the language for creating our server, we're going to use JavaScript for creating our server. And to do that, we're going to introduce Node.js. Node.js is a JavaScript interpreter that allows to run JavaScript code right on the command line as opposed to a browser. So we'll talk about that this whole week on how to create our own servers using the JavaScript language, using Node.js. And then next week, we'll connect that server to a database. And that database will be a non-relational database called MongoDB. So it's the same setup that we've been exploring for the last couple of weeks, where we have a server but implemented in Java, and then with a backend database of a relational database, MySQL. We're going to repeat that, but this time around, the server is going to be a Node.js server, and the database is going to be a non-relational database, MongoDB. Okay. All meanwhile implementing new widgets, right? Implementing new clients that talk to all these servers. So now our React application is going to be talking to 3 different data sources, right? It's going to be still talking to my generic server, right? It's going to be talking to your Java server, right, for widgets. Okay, so the generic server is going to be talking to for courses, modules, lessons, blah, 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 all that. And it's going to be talking to your server, your Java server, for widgets. And then and then we're going to introduce yet another data model, which is going to be handling for things like quizzes and and the answers and questions for quizzes is going to be handled by a Node.js server. Again, it doesn't need to be this complicated with all these many servers, but it's not unusual that an application over time, right, finds itself talking to all sort of data services, right? So obviously we're trying to recreate that in an academic environment where we are trying to introduce the complexity, right, just to make it challenging and introduce you to these kinds of issues that come up all the time in the industry, where you're trying to integrate all these disparate systems that are implemented in different technologies. Some of them are object-oriented, some of them are relational databases, non-relational databases, different languages, JavaScript, Python, Java, Kotlin, right? All these different languages, and so it's not uncommon that you find yourself doing this. Okay. All right. Excellent. So just a second. Where'd it go? Just a second. Oh, I was muted. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Can everybody hear me? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, Professor.
Okay, awesome. All right, awesome. Okay. Yeah. So let's take a look at that. Let's talk about Node.js. So what is Node.js? So Node.js is nothing more than a JavaScript interpreter. It just allows us to execute JavaScript on the command line, right? So when you think about JavaScript, most of the times you think about JavaScript executing here on the client, on the browser, right? The client, whether it's a browser or phone or whatnot, goes out and generates an HTTP request to some server, and then it downloads, right, various resources. If it's a web application, it'll download HTML, JavaScript, CSS, images, and so on and so forth. And then in the response, the browser client, right, runs your JavaScript and it builds our, it gives behavior to our client server, client application. So, but JavaScript is not only capable of running inside of a browser. We can certainly take out that interpreter that is embedded in the browser and just basically run it locally on our machines, right? And so that's exactly what Node.js is. It's a JavaScript interpreter that allows us to execute JavaScript right on the desktop. And so, what's the big deal? Why, how is this transformative? Well, so in a JavaScript running on the browser, it's all in good, but it's limited to what it can do inside of a browser. The browser has certain restrictions on what it can do within the boundaries of the browser, right? For instance, it cannot access the file system, right? That's definitely one limitation, right? And it can access any data sources or any data, or if it wants access to a database, it has to go out back to the server, right, and ask for data. Generate. The only way to communicate with anyone is through HTTP requests out of the browser, back to maybe to a server, right? Or anybody who will listen and is willing to receive its request. And so whereas a Node.js running on a desktop, it's no longer constrained by the security and the technical constraints that we put on browsers, right? It's on the desktop. It has full access to the file system. You can communicate with servers or databases running on the same machine or anywhere in the world without any restrictions, any security restrictions that we impose on browsers. They're not imposed on the desktop. You can run whatever you want. Okay, so definitely, a lot of things can be done with JavaScript running on an unencumbered, right, unrestricted JavaScript code. Now, there are some limitations, though, right? Unlike the browser, where JavaScript has access to a visual framework, right, that has a user interface. You can put buttons, you can put all sorts of input fields, and you can interact with the DOM and interact with a human being as they type of the keyboard and mouse and whatnot, right? You don't have that in Node.js on the server side, right? You just have the command line. Okay, so there is no on the server. You're not in a browser, so you don't have the DOM, right? There's no HTML. There are no buttons. There's no user interface whatsoever, right? So in some sense, these JavaScript running on the browser and running on the server somewhat complement each other, right? Because what you can do on the browser, you can't do on the server, or vice versa. What you can do on the server, you can't do on the browser. So these two are complement each other very well, as long as they can collaborate, through an API, which typically it's just going to be some HTTP API between the two, right? You can have React.js or Angular or just plain old JavaScript running on the browser, generating the user interface and interacting with the human being and translating human gestures into events, right? And those are going to be translated into actions that need to act upon data, right? And in data models and databases and whatnot, right? That are implemented with JavaScript on the server side. Okay, so that's exactly what we're going to introduce today. We're going to introduce Node.js, JavaScript running on a machine, right, from the command line, and see what we can do, right? With Java Unchained. So we're going to use that. We're going to see how we can integrate the browser side, React.js, with JavaScript running on the browser, implemented through React.js, and integrated with Node.js running on the server. Now the React part, right? The React part over here running on the client side is not going to change much, right? It doesn't really care that it's talking to a server that is running with the Java language or C# language or JavaScript language in Node.js, right? As long as this request, right, is a standard format, which is in our case is JSON, the React client doesn't really care what the server side is implemented as. Right? Again, it could be any language, it could be Python, it could be C, right? It could be any language that can speak HTTP and can accept JSON and respond to parameters and paths and whatnot, queries, right? It's all good. It understands HTTP headers and cookies and anything like that. Right? If it understands that, then it's all good. Okay. So there's no constraint of whether you use one client matched up with whatever particular server. You can mix and match. Right. So for your project, you're free to choose whatever you want on the combination of this technology stack. Right. If you want to use Java with React.js or Angular with Node.js, right? And in the database, if you want to use MySQL or Mongo or Firebase or whatever database you might feel comfortable with, right? Any combination of these layered stack, it's your choice, right? It's as long as they all talk the same language, it doesn't really matter what is that you put in for as a placeholder. Okay, so for the remainder of the semester, we're going to be working a lot with Node.js and Mongo, right, to implement the next couple of assignments, and it'll give us a chance to practice how to use Node.js, how to store data in a non-relational database, and whatnot. Okay, right. So the first part, the first step, you'll need to navigate to the Node.js website, right? And you'll need to download your Node.js installer for your particular operating system. Okay, so here's the Node.js installer for version 14. Is the latest, most for most of us. Okay, but yeah, if you want to check out the bleeding edge features, there's a version 15. But we're not gonna be exploring any bleeding edge feature. The just the basic Node.js will do. So yeah, download that and install it. When it installs, right, it'll add itself to the path, so you'll be able to execute a few things, right? You'll be able to execute at least 2 new executables, right? One will be Node, right, itself. It's going to be a command line interpreter, and the other one is going to be npm. Okay, so Node is the interpreter, the actual interpreter. It's just like, if you're in Java, right, and you give it a Java C, a Java class, you can say Java, and then you run it, right? Same thing with Node. Node, you can take as argument a file, a JavaScript file, and let's see, Node, and then you can give it a file, and then it'll execute that file and interpret it like regular JavaScript. Okay, so let's do that. So if I've already installed Node. If you start up a terminal, right, and you run Node, notice that it enters a command line interpreter. How do you make this bigger? Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Oh no, how do I get out of here? This is a new machine I bought, and I'm not quite sure how to make this bigger. Anybody knows how to make the terminal text bigger on a Windows machine? On a Mac, is just Control plus. I need to go into
I think it's properties, yeah.
Really? There's no way from the command, from the font. Okay, that's a little better. And so let's create a project where we can do our work. And so that's where npm comes in. So npm is a tool that allows us to install libraries and install modules that can then extend the features of Node.js. It stands for Node Package Manager. Right? It's very similar to other package managers in many other languages, right? Brew is a very common package manager in Mac OS. MVN, Maven is a very common, very popular package for the Java programming language, right? And every language and infrastructure will have its own package manager, how to install new libraries and whatnot. And really, that's where the interesting part of the language is, right? The languages per se are not very interesting, right? As much as the community that has come around and has been built around that particular language or infrastructure, and they start creating new tools, new libraries for the community, and that's what enhances and makes the the experience of using a particular infrastructure, pleasant. In particular, we'll be going to be introducing several libraries that are very popular in the Node.js community, right? That will allow us to very easily implement very complex things, but very, very easily, or very, very powerful things, right? But just with a few lines of code. So let's go to NEU. Let's see what we got here. Januzzi, documents. Let's go to NEU, go to web dev. Oops. And go to section 1. So we're going to create a project that is going to allow us to practice with Node.js. I'm going to follow the same naming convention. And so I'm going to create first the directory. I'm going to say make directory. I'm going to use a naming, same name, but it's going to be a server. It's going to be a Node.js server, right? So this is going to be a server. But instead of being a Java server, it is going to be a Node server. Okay. All right, there we go. So we've created a directory. It's a plain directory, nothing special about it. So let's go in there. And it's empty. There's nothing in there. So in this directory, let's we're going to create the project, a Node.js project, right? And the way we do that is by saying npm init. And so npm init is going to start is going to initialize this project, right? It's going to ask us, you're creating a brand new Node package. Is this the name that you want to use, right? And yes, we're going to use that as the default name. We'll say yes. Just enter. Version, yes. I'm going to just choose the defaults here. Sample Node server, for web dev. Entry point, test command. If there's a Git repository, you can say which one it is here. You can point it later on when you push it. Keywords, author, I'll say Jose Annunciado. License, this is okay. And notice what it does is that it creates a file. It creates a JSON file, right? Called package.json. Okay. And it just contains some of the information that we typed in there. It is a standard file, right? It has a specific structure. Okay. This is the equivalent in Java for the POM file, right? If you remember the POM file, it was pom.xml. It described all the dependencies that a project had, right, with other libraries, right? That it, it needed the MySQL connector, it needed, JPA, it needed Spring Boot, it needed all these other infrastructure libraries that needed to be downloaded and installed for it to work. Same thing here. Package.json has exactly the same role. It describes any dependencies that your project has with other libraries. Right now, we have no dependencies whatsoever. Okay. And we're going to be adding dependencies as we go along. We're going to add a dependency for communicating with the database later on. Right? We're going to add a dependency so that we can parse JSON data going back and forth between the server. We're going to install Express. The Express library is a very, very popular library for being able to build servers. Just a few lines of code, you have a running server. So yeah, so we're going to be installing quite a few libraries here. Okay. For now, let's just start with opening this with our IDE and start playing around with what's in there. Right, so let's head over to our IDE. I'm going to say open, and let's go. Oops. Web dev, section 1, and this is our brand new Node.js server. Let's open that up. There it is. So this is our so there's nothing in here yet, right? And basically what we can do is just create new files. Let's create a new JavaScript file. And let's say hello.js. And it's empty. There's nothing in there. And here you can just say console log, hello world. Right, so this is the typical ubiquitous hello world application that we academics have you run every time they introduce some new programming language, right? So we installed that, we ran that, and let's run it from the command line. We can say node, let's see, ls. Now we have this hello.js. We say node hello. And notice indeed it worked, right? It prints out hello world to the command line. So in this JavaScript, you basically can write all the JavaScript you want, and it will do exactly what you would expect. You have all the for loops, you have the functions. You can use ES6 as you've been using so far in React.js. So everything you would expect to work in your React is here as well, except that there is no UI. Okay, there's no DOM, right? There's no CSS, there's no HTML, right? So most of what we're going to be doing is data manipulation. Okay, let's see. Is there a question in the chat? Oh, okay. Windows key plus, hold, control, and zoom. Let's see if that works. Oh, yeah, that worked. Oh, that's kind of like zoom. Zoom. Okay, hold, control, and zoom. Control and zoom. Oh, there we go. Oh, so okay, it does work. Okay, that works. Perfect. Excellent. Thank you. Perfect. Excellent. Yes, that's what I was expecting. Okay, excellent. So let's keep moving here. So what we want to build at first is a server, right? And I mean, you can implement any application whatsoever here. It doesn't have to be a server, obviously, right? It's just a programming language, and you can build whatever you want. We're going to be using it for implementing an HTTP server, right? And that by far that's one of the most common uses for Node.js of serving as a server, or serving as a server, right? Of being able to be a repository of data that we can go and fetch data from a server. Okay, so let's do that. Oops. Yeah, so these are the steps for creating the Node.js application. We did a console log. Okay, we're going to be installing our first library. Okay, this is the Express library. And the way you install new libraries, you just say npm and install in the library you want. Okay. Now all these libraries are maintained here at npmjs.com. And here, this is a repository where anybody can come in and publish packages that they want to share with the rest of the community. And I mean, there's tons and tons of free stuff here that you can just install. You can say npm install and then the library. It will come here to this repository and download these libraries and install them locally on your machine. You can install it for your particular project, or you can install it globally, for your operating system. Okay. So in particular, we're going to be using the Express library. It's one of the most popular libraries. There's 16 million downloads every week, and it's a very, very powerful, very useful, very easy to use library that allows you to implement HTTP server, in just a few lines of code. Right here, you have there's the typical example of creating a server just in 4 lines of code maybe. All right, so let's take a look at it. Let's create our brand new server. Let's create a new file here, and it'll be JavaScript server.js. All right, let's paste that in there. So first of all, it'll want to load the Express library, so we need to install it first. So let's install it. We can do it from the command line right here in our PowerShell, or we can do it from within our IDE like we've been doing. Right, so let's open up our terminal here, and we can say npm install Express, save. So save says make sure that this dependency, this library, is listed as a dependency to this project. Okay, so if you say save, And it's going to download Express, and it's going to copy that library locally on our machine. Okay. So a couple things here. Notice that, and one of the things is that if you open up your package.json, you'll notice that Express now is listed as a dependency. See that? Okay, this is important that it's listed here, because when you deploy it in AWS or Heroku or wherever you deploy it, right? Your host is going to take a look at your package.json file, going to parse this file, going to see that your project depends on this library. It will download and install that library for you. Okay, so make sure that your dependencies are listed in package.json. Otherwise, you'll find yourself that your project works locally on your machine, but it's not working remotely when you deploy it to Heroku or elsewhere. Okay. Another thing to mention is that we've installed Express locally to this project, right? We did not install it globally for all the projects. We've only installed it for this project, which is fine, right? Because we only want it for this project. But what it does is that it installs it in a directory, a brand new directory that you can see here that says Node_module. See that? Right? If you open it up, there's tons of stuff that was downloaded that you didn't ask for this, right? But the Express library depends on other libraries. Okay, so NPM understands the dependency chains, right? That you have a library depending on other libraries, and it will traverse this dependency chain by downloading everything that the particular library that you're installing depends on, right? So it copies it locally here. And I see that body parser has been downloaded already. Perfect. Okay. All right. So there it is. So we've installed Express, and so let's see what this does. All right, let's take a look at our server, which we copied the code from the example code that the Express website had, right? So let's take a look at it real quick. So this first line says it's declaring a variable Express require Express. So require is the equivalent of import, right? You cannot use ES6 import here. Instead, this is import works fine in the browser. Here, the equivalent is require, right? Require, what it does is that it finds libraries, right, and then instantiates them and sets the local variable Express. Okay, and what this does is require if you pass this Express, if you don't put /, right, and you just put the name, right, what it will do is that it will look for that dependency under the Node_modules. So it'll find it right here. There it is. Okay. If instead you put a dot in front of it, your /, it will look for it in the path, right, in the local path. But that's not what we want, right? And we know that Express is a library that we've installed, so we don't want that, right? So we want the one under Node_modules. Okay. All right. So it loads it in. It creates an instance of it, and it turns out that Express, right, is bound to whatever this guy exports. Right? Just like in React.js, you can export and you can import. Over here, same thing. Right, the Express package has exported something, right, and now it's bound to the local variable Express. It turns out that this, what the Express library is exporting is a function, right? So we are invoking that function, and when you invoke that function, it does all sorts of setup internally, right, and it returns to us an instance of the actual library so that we can start using it. Okay. You can assign it to any variable. You can call whatever you want. A very common variable name is app. App as in the application. Okay. Once you have app, right? There can only be one app around, right? You need to, if you have other files that want to use app, you need to pass it to them so that they can use the same instance. There's only one instance of Express. Okay. And then this app provides an API for working with HTTP, right? And with setting up a server. You can set up a server just by starting up the server and say app.listen, right? And then you can give it a port number to listen to. Okay, a common port number in Node.js amongst Node.js developers is port 3000. Okay, so app.listen 3000 is a very, very common port. And here we've used app to listen for an incoming HTTP GET, right? So app.get, this is the equivalent in Java when we did the GET mapping. Remember that? GET mapping, and then you provided a URL for listening for incoming request. And then so that's the first argument to get is the URL that you're listening to, right? If the server sees a URL pattern that matches this slash, it will execute the second argument. Notice that the second argument here is a function, okay? Right, meaning if it sees that slash, it will invoke this function over here, okay? Now, this function takes two arguments, right? It takes two arguments. It takes the request argument and the response argument, okay? Request allows you to read everything that is coming from wherever, from the client. In particular, we're going to be interested in sending requests from a React client, right? If the React client sends body, JSON in the body or something in the path or cookies or whatever, that's going to be accessible through the request, right? The response, the RES, right? That's going to allow us in this function to send something back as a response, okay? In this case, we're sending back a hello world, okay? Because so this is your hello world in the Express library. Okay, we saw the hello world earlier just by doing console.log. This one is I'm going to hit a URL, and this is going to be the response. Make sense? Okay. All right, so let's try it out. The way you run it. Okay, let's see. There's a question on the chat. PowerShell, please. Okay. So just like the response we get from REST-API. Yes, exactly. Okay, so let's see. So let's run it. We'll say node and then server. There it is. So node.server, and we can make that a little bigger. So we enter that. It's asking us, are you sure you want to run this? We're going to say yes. Go ahead. Okay. So now if we head over to any browser and we open up a new tab, we can go to, oops, wait, localhost 3000 / enter, and didn't work. What? Wait a minute, what happened here? Did I give it the right permissions? Maybe I didn't give it the right permissions.
You're missing the colon.
Colon. Oh my goodness, yes, thank you. There we go, hello world. Okay, so thank you. Yeah, so this is coming from that server, right, which is returning just a simple string. Okay, let's see, is there a question in the chat? Will it work without the slash? Yes, it will work without the slash. I put the slash there just for illustration purposes. Okay. All right, so let's play around a little more with this this server. All right, it's a very simple server. Oops. Put this on the right. Okay. Wait. Just a second. There we go. Okay, let's play around a little bit more with the server. This could be really anything. It doesn't have to be slash. You can say can be anything, right? And if we restart, You restart. If we come back and refresh, notice that there's nothing mapped to slash anymore. There's nothing mapped to can. No, nothing mapped to that. B. No, nothing to that. Anything. There we go. So it is mapped to that slash, to that particular URL, right? And it will only execute when it matches that URL. Okay. You can also pass arguments, right? Where, for instance, you can say, app.get, and you can pass in, say add, and you can pass in the a variable called parameter A and parameter B. Okay, and here you can put a function. Right now, the function can be embedded here, or you can define a function somewhere else. Add. Okay, so for instance, the function can be declared maybe up here. You say const add, and you can use either the old syntax of function, or you can use the new ES6 syntax as well. But it always takes as argument a request and a response. A request and a response. And these names of the variables are whatever you want them to be. They don't have to be REQ or RES. It could be whatever you want. But the first argument represents the request coming in from the client, and the second one is the response that you can use to send back to the client, right? In this way, with the request response, we can fully implement the architecture, the client server architecture, right? Where the client sends a request and then the server sends back a response, right? Very, very common, very popular architecture in multi-tiered applications. Okay, so what can we do here? We can with the request, anything that is coming from the server, including the URL, including the path itself, any JSON that we're sending through, any cookies, any headers that we might sending, everything is accessible through the request object, that first one, right? So how do we retrieve these guys? Well, let me actually move this up so that's easier to read. There we go. The way we read these parameters is that the request has a function, has a variable called params. Okay, so you can say request.params, which includes it's a map, right? That it parses out the location, right? The location of the whether it's the second, third, fourth element in the path, right? It parses it out, and then it creates a map of using these variables as the keys, and then the values are part of the map, the value of the map. All right, so you can say params and then param A, okay? And we can maybe store it in local variables, so const A. Okay, and then we can do B. Say B here. And when we can send back here, we can say response. We can send back A plus B, right? Let's do that. Let's restart the server. Now, notice how I'm restarting the server. I'm restarting the server by typing here node space server.js. Don't do that, right? Don't do that. You can add a configuration. You can say add configuration and create a node configuration, and you can tell it the file you want to run. We're going to run server.js. Right, we're going to say OK. And now you can run it from here. You say run. All right, so it's running. Let's see. Let's refresh, see if that works. And let's try calling that add 2 and 3. Notice that comes back with 23, right? Because right? Because it's taking the 2 and the 3 as strings, and it's applying the when you get something from the parameters, it's always a string, right? So we need to parse this as an integer. But I want to go back to this, setting up this configuration here. The importance of setting up the configuration is that now you can put a breakpoint. You can put a breakpoint, and if you you can restart it from right here as in debug mode, right? So for instance, you restart it. Don't ask, just restart it, and allow it to communicate, such as home. Yes. So that's running in debug mode. So if I hit this again and I refresh, okay, notice that now it's at the breakpoint. You can hover and see values that are coming from the client, and allows you to debug, right? And so this is a great tool for debugging communication between the client and the server. You can do the same exact thing from about demo application using the Java server application that we've been running, right? We can run it in debug mode. Very, very powerful. Right? If I don't see a configuration here, I'm going to suspect if you come to my office hours and you don't have a configuration, you're running it from the command line, I'm going to suspect that you have not been debugging your work, right? So yeah, make sure that you are debugging your work, putting some effort into that, and then you can just step through. You can say just continue, and then or just just go, keep going. Yeah, so let's fix this. We're gonna need to parse this. We'll say parse int and let's parse that int, and let's do that same thing here. Parse int. There we go. And now if we rerun this again and refresh, it gives us an error. What? Server blah 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 blah. What happened here? A B yada yada yada. Uh-oh. Invalid yada yada yada. Invalid status code 5. Stringify the 5 for sending? No. Put a breakpoint here. Yeah, so yeah, I meant to do this so that we can debug this. Let's refresh this. Oops, it's stop the server. Stop and run it again. Put a breakpoint here. What is going on? Add 2/3. Can be anything. So that's working. And add param A, param B. What is going on here? Const A, parse int, param A and B. Interesting. Let's comment that out. It doesn't like this parse int. That can't be. Let's restart. So okay, that works. And so we can't do int. Parse int A. Is that what breaks? Let's restart. Let's debug this. Refresh. Okay, let's see A. A is the string 2. Continue. And AA is the number 2. Okay. And how about BB? And I should be able to just say AA plus BB, right? Let's put a breakpoint right there. Let's run this again. Okay. You have AA is the number 2 and 3, and continue. And it gives an error. Oh, you know what it is? Yes, I know what it is. So send, yeah, send is a by default, right? It can send a status code, right? So HTTP has many status codes. For instance, 200 is success, 404 is that it can't find something, right? And so it's the browser is interpreting, right? It's interpreting. If you say inspect, you can see what's coming back from the network. So it's yeah. So continue. You can see that it's coming to 3. See that the value 3. So the browser is interpreting that as an error code. So the response is literally 3. That 3 here, right? And so it's interpreting as an error code. So yeah. So you can send. You can send this converted into a string, which is fine. Let's convert that into a string, and it will be the expression. There we go, of A plus B. Okay, let's try it again. There we go, 5. All right, so a string is an okay, but a number 3, right? It's interpreted as a do we still need? Yeah, we don't need the AA and BB. Yeah, we were just debugging it. That's all. Yeah, we don't really need AA and BB. Yeah. All right. So let's keep going. You can also pass data as queries. Okay. So for instance, let's re-implement this. Let's re-implement this with subtract. So do subtract. But we're not going to pass the arguments here as in the path. Instead, we're going to pass them as queries. Right? So subtract here. We can say app.get again. Oh, wait, no, we did that already. We need the function, the actual function, right? So const subtract takes in the request and the response. Okay. So instead of passing it as part of the path, we're going to pass them as part of the query, right? Meaning, what we're going to do is this instead. We're going to say subtract, and we say query string, right? The question mark, and then parameters, you know, something like x equal 4 and y equal 7. Okay, all right. So you can pass parameters as either the query or as part of the path. You can do this in Java as well. We just didn't cover how to handle queries using the controllers in Java, but you can do the same thing. So let me show you how to handle that here. Right, the request can parse those as instead of using the params. There's another one. There's query. Right? So you can say const x is equal to request query, right? And then you can put here the variable that you want. So you want x, so that's x. Okay, and we can do y as well. So it's x and y, right? And then we can then do subtract. We can say const z is equal to x minus z minus y, right? And then we're gonna do the same thing we did earlier, right? I'm gonna just copy this, and I'm gonna send it as a string. I'm gonna send z as a string. Here we go. So let's just restart. So there we go. So let's do enter. Send z. Oh, we never parsed it. We never parsed it. This is parse int. Oh, it's rs too. Rs. And we need to parse this. We need to parse this. Parse int. parse int. There we go. Let's run this again. There we go, -3. Yeah, so 4 minus 7 is -3. Okay, that works. Perfect, excellent. So anyway, so one of the things that what we're doing, notice that this file is getting big, right? It's getting pretty big. So instead of having it here, right, we're going to move this into a separate directory, right? So anything that deals with HTTP, we're going to put it in a file called controllers, very much like we did in the Java side, right? Anything that has to do with HTTP, that's a controller, right? So we're going to put it in a controllers directory. So this is a we'll call it demo, right? Demo controller. Right, so we have a whole bunch of demos in here. So we're going to move all that code that we have here, all this. I'm going to say cut. I'm going to cut it out of here, and I'm going to paste it in here. Okay. So how do we now connect these two? Because notice that this file needs the app, right? And the app is here. So we need to somehow pass it to this file over here. So how do we do that? So the way we're going to do that, the way we're going to do this is that we're going to wrap this controller. We're going to wrap it inside of a function and say module.export. So module exports is the mechanism of a file exporting something for others folks to import or require, right? So this is the equivalent. Whatever you say module.exports equal, whatever you assign to this global variable, right, can be imported or can be required by others. So what we're going to export here is a function. I'm going to export a function. And the reason is that you can really export anything. You can export a single variable. You can export an object, right? You can export a function. Anything can be exported. The reason why I'm exporting a function is that because I want you to be able to pass me in that function the app, which I need. See that? So I'm going to move all this, right? And I'm going to paste it in here. There we go. Okay. Let's add here. There we go. Okay. Now that it's inside here, now app is defined. It's defined, and because you are passing it to me as a function. Okay. And so now from here, I can just import. I can import that function. We say const demos. I can say require. Right now, I can navigate. Notice that now I don't want to look in the node_modules. Right. I don't want to go in here. Right, because that's not where my controller is. Instead, it's inside of a directory called controllers. So now I need to do /. Okay, / allows me to navigate the file system, whereas if you don't put anything, you're navigating instead of node_modules. Okay, so controllers / and then demo controller. Notice that here too, just like in the React side, we don't have to put the JavaScript at the end. We can if we want, but we don't have to. It's implied. Okay. So now that I have the function, right? Because now this is the function right here. Right? We can just say demos, right? And I can call it passing the app. Make sense? Right? And if I refresh, I rerun the server, and I go back and I refresh, notice that this still works just the same way. So that's how you break out, bigger, better applications. And this is kind of like the mechanism that we're going to be using for building and breaking out our applications. Okay, the server should be as small as possible, only having absolutely the minimum that you need to set up starting up the server, and then divvying out all the work throughout various controls and services. Okay, excellent. So let's do a little more here. Let's so right now the controller has been just sending some silly numbers and whatnot. Let's make it something a little more interesting. Okay, and in particular, we're going to be using the assignment as an example. right? So for our assignment, we're being asked to create a RESTful application, right? Using the Node.js server, and so the first half of the semester focused on implementing an online learning management system, but mostly focused towards the faculty, right? The faculty could create content, courses, modules, and widgets and whatnot. Now let's focus a little bit more on the student, right? The student interacting with this, right? And one of the more interesting interactions that students can have is with either working with their assignments or taking quizzes, exams, and things like that, right? So those are the kinds of interactions that students can have with a learning management system. So let's build a let's build some code that will allow us to do that. Okay. All right. So let's do that. So we are giving you very much like we did for the Java side, right? We broke out in the Java side. We broke out everything that had to do with HTTP. We put it in controllers. Anything that had to do with data manipulation, right? We put it in services, right? So in our case, the service, right, is going to allow us to manipulate quizzes, right? So we're gonna be keeping track of multiple quizzes, right? And each quiz is gonna have a whole bunch of questions, right? And students are gonna be able to take these quizzes, okay? And for now, these quizzes are gonna be just JSON files. In the next assignment, right, instead of being these files, we're gonna use a non-relational database, Mongo, right? So we're gonna replace the use of this file. We're gonna replace it with a relational database, right? So let's take a look at the data that I'm giving you. I'm giving you a file called quizzes.json. So let's do that. Let's create here a directory called services. So services. So remember, services are going to allow us to manipulate data, right, in the database eventually. For now, we just have a file. Okay, so let's put in here all the logic to deal with data, right, including the data itself. Okay, so let's create a file here, and this will be quizzes.json. Okay, and I'm going to in here copy this. I'm going to paste it. So we got let's see, we got three quizzes. 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, and 3, 4, 5. Those are the IDs. Notice that the ID, I'm putting an underscore in front of it. See that? That's because that's looking ahead, and taking into consideration that next week we're going to be talking about MongoDB, and the primary key in MongoDB has an underscore in front of it. Okay, so I'm already setting this up. So the code that we write today, right, will be applicable for next week when we talk about MongoDB and talking to a relational database, right? So anyway, it says so each quiz has two properties. It has just an ID, primary key, and the name or title for the quiz. Okay. Right. So what we want to be able to do is make this data available to a React application who wants to render these quizzes. Okay. So we'll implement a service that gives us access to that data, right? And so remember, a service is going to provide all the operations that we can do with that data source, right? Including being able to create, remove, update, delete. Okay, let's start off with the simple ones, just being able to read the data, access the data, right? So let's implement that here. We're going to say, fine, we're going to create a quizzes service. Okay, and so this is going to allow us to manipulate the CRUD. Is the underscore ID the global UUID? Yes, yeah. In next week, we will leave that to Mongo. Mongo is going to be responsible for creating that unique identifier. It will be I think it's like a 32-bit, UUID that it generates dynamically on the fly. So we'll talk about that next week. Okay. So what we're going to be doing here is that we're going to implement functions here, like create quiz, right? Things like that. So const find all quizzes. Right? So all the CRUD operations that we would expect, right? But this is happening on the server side, right? Same thing that we wrote in Java, talking to MySQL. We're going to be implementing here in JavaScript, but talking to Mongo, right? Here, find quiz by ID. Right? These are all the common operations we would expect to implement. Yes. Const update or delete CRUD. So update quiz, right? And delete quiz. Okay. Then we would like to export this, make this available to everybody. And the way we're going to do that is the way we export things, right? Using module.export. So module that exports, and whatever you assign to this module export will be able to import or require, right, from elsewhere. So in here, we're going to put all the things that we want to export. So we want to export, create quiz, find all quizzes, find quiz by ID, update quiz, and delete quiz. Yeah. There we go. Okay. Right. So once we have the service, then the controller will be responsible for exposing this as an HTTP API, right? So let's take a look at the controller, what that might look like. So the controller here, you would have a quizzes controller, right? And the quizzes controller is going to create functions that are going to be mapped to URLs, right? That will provide a RESTful API. Okay, so and then it needs to expose that, export it so that it can be then added to the server.js, right? So something like module.exports, and just like we did before, right? We have a function here, and then you would have all the apps, right? App.get for being able to get all the quizzes. So /API/quizzes, that returns all the quizzes, right? So this would be some function, and then you have maybe a particular quiz, right? And you provide the quiz ID, right? The quiz ID. Okay. So these functions would be what? These would be the functions that actually retrieve all the quizzes. Right? It would be the function, find all quizzes, right? And then const find quiz by ID. Now these are all HTTP requests, right? So these are all receiving request response, right? These are all receiving request response. So now we can map these, right? We're going to say that if you say /API quizzes, then you're going to call find all quizzes, right? And if you see / quizzes and followed by an ID, you're going to call find quiz by ID right here. Okay. All right. Okay, so remember, controllers only deal with HTTP. They don't actually do anything, right? They only know how to respond to a URL, but they don't hold data, right? They're not the ones who hold the data. Who holds the data? In our case, the service is responsible to hold the data. Okay, so basically the controller is always just going to delegate the actual work of touching the data, right, to the service, right? So the controllers don't do anything. So it's the same architecture we followed in the Java code, right? The controller only receive the parameters, right? Receive the request body, right? And then it sent back data, right? But it did not actually manipulate the data. Instead, it relied on the service, right? So let's bring in the service. So we're going to say const quizzes service. We're going to import. We're going to require. We go up one, down to the services, and then down to the quizzes service. Right. So now we can rewrite the quizzes service. Quizzes service. It's just going to do what? It's just going to respond whatever the quizzes service responds, right? So the quizzes service is going to say respond. We're going to send back whatever the quizzes services dot find all quizzes, right? Or I guess you can do it like this, right? So you can say quizzes is right. It retrieves that, and then we're going to send back all the quizzes. Okay. All right. In the find quiz by ID is going to be very similar. Right? It's going to read the quiz ID first. Yeah. So it's going to say const quiz ID from the request, from the params, right? The quiz ID, right? This one right here. Let's see. There's a question in the chat. What do rec and rest do in find all quizzes? So find all quizzes, the request is actually not doing anything, right? Because we're not passing anything in the request. So we're ignoring the request. We're using the response to send data back to the client, whoever asks for this. Right? They didn't send any information. Something interesting, right, which we don't do for the assignment, but it'd be really, really nice, is that the API would actually be something like courses, the course ID, right, and then the quizzes for that course. We don't have that. That would be adding it's definitely a higher level of complexity. I'll think about it. Maybe I'll add it as a bonus. Right now, all courses have the same quizzes. But yeah, I could, we could do that, and then we would need to use the request to parse the course ID, but we don't have that, right? So we're ignoring the request fields here completely. We're just using the response. Here we are using the request, right, to retrieve the quiz ID, so that we can then retrieve the quiz, the particular quiz. We can say, quizzes service dot find quiz by ID, and we can pass the quiz ID, right? And then we're going to respond and send back that one quiz. Okay. All right. So that's the controller. What do these functions do? Right? Find all quizzes. What is that? So find all quizzes is supposed to presumably return this array. Right? So how do we do that? Right. So we need the array. Let's load the array. We can require the file. We can say const quizzes. We can require an entire file. Quizzes, there it is, right? And so find all quizzes basically is just going to return the content of that file. It's going to say return quizzes. Next week is this is not going to use a file. Instead, it's going to make a database call. Right? It's going to do a Mongo database call. It's going to retrieve all the quizzes in a table, right, or a collection, and retrieve all those records. Okay. For now, this just returns that. Actually, let's try this out. Let's run this. Actually, no, we need one more thing, right? We have the controller, but notice the controller is a function that nobody's calling. So we need to load it into the server, right? So let's load that in with const quizzes controller, require controller quizzes controller, and then we're going to say quizzes controller pass the app. Okay. All right, let's run this. It's running. Let's try it out. So this would be API/quizzes And that looks like it works. There we go, right? There we go, right? So we have the quizzes coming back, right, from the server, right? So the other implementation would be for retrieving an individual quiz, right? So this would be in quizzes service, right? So we have find all quizzes. How about find quizzes by ID? So where find quizzes by ID, where the controller is passing, right, is passing the ID here as an argument. Okay, so let's have that as an argument. Copy. There's quiz ID. And basically what we're going to do is just that we're just going to iterate over the quizzes. And when we find the one with the correct quiz ID, that's the one we're going to return. Right? So, and I think we have that. We have a filter, or something like find. The quizzes.find. Okay, so we're going to iterate over the quizzes, find the one, if this is a quiz, if this is the quiz, we're going to return the one where quiz.id matches. All right, I'll put this in a new line. Matches the quiz ID that we pass in as an argument. Okay. Maybe we should put this in a parentheses. All right. Let's see. Let's restart the server. So now, okay, so this should still work the same way. Okay, all the quizzes. But say we want quiz number 2, 3, 4. Let's see. There we go. Notice that it's returning that one quiz. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5. Right? It's returning the different quizzes. Does that make sense? Is everyone still with me? Yeah. So we've demonstrated being able to create controller, right? The service, right? Now, what are we doing with this, right? So the assignment asks you to do the following. So having created the service, the controller, right, mapped to these URLs, which we just did, right? So basically, I've done for you the at least a third of the assignment, right? The service, quiz service, the controller. Okay. There's our controller, right? There's our controller. There's our service. Very good. We did the service. There's the JSON. Okay, it's going to ask you to do the same thing, but for questions. Okay. Now the questions. I think they're going to be like three types of questions. So a quiz. Each quiz can have any number of questions, but each question can be of a different type. Okay, so for instance, let's look at this over here. Let me actually copy this so that we can copy that. I'm going to put it inside of questions so that we can look at it a little easier here. So in the services, let's start new file here. This will be questions. I want a JSON. Cancel. Refactor, rename .json. Okay, so in here, let's open that up. Let's paste this so that we can look at it a little bit easier. And refactor it. Code, comma, reformat code. Okay, that's easy to read. Okay, so let's see. We got several questions. Okay, so each question has a unique identifier. Unique identifier, find the title of the question. Note it has a quiz ID. See that? That quiz ID is kind of like a foreign key, right? So that you can first ask in a query. You can say, well, give me all the quizzes. Give me all the quizzes. Right here. Give me all the quizzes. 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5. And then maybe you can navigate to a quiz. You know the idea of the quiz. And then you can do a subsequent query where you can ask for the questions for a given quiz. right? So this particular question belongs to quiz ID 234. Here's another question for quiz ID 234. There's another question for quiz 234. This question is for quiz 345. This is also for 345, and this is for quiz 123. Right, so we have 3 questions for 234. We have 2 questions for quiz 345, and we have 1 question for quiz 123. Okay? All right. All right, so let's take a look at the questions. So the questions are, it says for in quiz 234, there are 3 questions. The first question says, question, JPA stands for Java Persistence API, right? And the type of the question is that this is a true false question, the true false question. And the question also knows what the right answer is, right? The answer is true, it's correct. Okay, here's another question, another type of question. Title is JPA multiple choice, right? The question is, what does JPA stand for, right? And the correct answer is Java Persistence API. The type of the question is multiple choice, okay? And these are the choices. So the multiple choice question has a whole bunch of choices that presumably the user can choose which one is right. And then we're going to be able to grade the question and check to see which one you chose, right? JavaScript versus Java Persistence API. I'm going to compare it against the correct answer and then give you full credit for that. And the last one says another true false question. JSON stands for Java Object Notation, right? Which is false, so it's another true false question. So I guess there are only 2 types of questions. Only 2 types of questions: true false question and multiple choice questions, basically. Okay. All right. All right. With that said, having that said, right? You're going to create a RESTful controller, right? That is going to allow us to say, given a particular quiz with a particular quiz ID, give me the questions for that quiz. And your controller should allow to do that, right? You're gonna have a question service that is, going to retrieve the question ID, is going to retrieve it and then return it. And I basically give you the implementation right here. The server, right? Notice that it's loading the quizzes controller, which we did. Notice the notation here. Notice the notation. All right, let me talk about this notation right here. If you go back here in the server, this server, okay, notice that what we did here is that we first required, and then we called that function. See that? We could have written this a little more terse, right? So we could have done this instead. Require, not assign it to a variable, but instead done that. Because why is that? Well, this require is going to be bound to what? To the function, isn't it? So this, right, this left-hand side over here evaluates, basically it evaluates to what? It evaluates to this function right here, this function right here. See that? This function, which is expecting you to pass it app. And indeed, that's what we're doing, right? So there's the function, and we can just pass it the app, right? So this is a much more compact version of doing the same thing, and that's what I have here. Another thing that I have here, okay, which we didn't cover, let me cover it. I'm gonna just copy this, copy that. And right after doing this app here, right after doing that app, I'm gonna paste this in here, okay? And what this does, this is going to configure course, okay? Okay, if you remember, in Java, we had the issue of the React application running on one port, but having the Java server running on 8080. And we would get course conflicts. And the way we fixed that was by using the at cross origin and then origins equals star. Remember that? Well, this is the equivalent, but going a little bit more nitty gritty, more hands down, right? We're saying we are turning on and off certain headers, letting the browser know that the access control, we're accepting all origins, star, that's star, right? Remember in Java, we said cross origin and then origins equals star. Remember that? We were saying we're allowing headers. We are allowing the following methods, right? Meaning you can send us HTTP GET, you can send us post, you can send us put. We are accepting everything. You can send us anything you want. Basically, we are opening ourselves to the world, right? Anybody who wants to contact us, go ahead. Okay. So what this is saying is that this app.use, what it's doing is that it says for all the requests that are coming in, doesn't matter whether it's get, post, put, delete, I don't care, right? They're all going to come through here first. They're all going to come through here, so that I can do filter here. I can do some logic operations for all requests, regardless of whether they get, post, put, delete, right? And I'm making sure that all the requests that are coming in have the following headers. Okay, I'm sorry, not the requests, the responses, right? So that the responses that when it goes back to the server, to the client, right? The client says, "Hey, we're open for business. You can send us whatever you want. We're good." Okay. So yeah, so this configures the course. This configures course. What else do I give you? Okay, so right, so that's the server side. The server side. On the client side, you need to create, just like you created widget service and topic service and course service, all those services on the React side. Well, you're gonna have to create one for the quizzes. The quizzes, so that you can go fetch all the quizzes, right? You can fetch an individual quiz, right? And you're gonna have to do the same for questions, right? You're gonna have to do, so that you can retrieve the questions for a given quiz, right? So you can fetch the quizzes / the quiz ID and then the questions, right? Once you have that, you can now build a UI. You can build a UI. So for instance, we're going to build a quizzes component. The quizzes component. So what the quizzes component is going to do is that it's just going to render all the quizzes, basically. Okay. And so the way we're going to arrive at the quizzes component, right? So the quizzes component, what it's going to do is it's going to use the find all quizzes, right? Find all quizzes from the server. The server is going to come back with our three quizzes, right? These 3 quizzes, and it's going to render the title of the quizzes. Okay. Now, all courses are going to have a link. We're going to add a hyperlink to the course list where you can see the quizzes. Okay. And then when you click on the quizzes, right, it navigates to the quizzes for that course. Now, we're not going to have that each course has different quizzes. I mean, if you want to do that, I mean, by all means, go ahead. It is not required at all. But if you want to experiment that'd be really, really cool. For now, we're going to keep it really simple. All the courses are going to have the same quizzes, right? So no matter which quizzes you click here for course 5500, 1800, 5610, 50, so it doesn't matter, right? It navigates to the same 3 quizzes, right? Again, because I'm trying to keep it simple, right? Otherwise, it'd be fairly complex. For each course, there'll be a different quiz. But again, right? If you want to play it, if you want to explore that, go ahead. All right, so yeah. Okay, once you click on a start a particular quiz, either quiz 1, 2, or 3, then you're going to navigate and display the questions for that one quiz. So for instance, say I selected quiz number 3, right? Quiz number 3 had 2 questions. Quiz number 3 has 2 questions. It has one multiple choice and has one true/false question, right? And you'll need a component that knows how to render this, right? A quiz component that knows how to iterate over the questions in that quiz, right? And as it iterates over the questions, it checks to see what type of question it is. If it's a multiple choice question, it renders a multiple choice component. If it's a true/false question, it renders a true/false component. Okay, so you are asked to implement a true/false question component and a multiple choice question component, right? The true/false question component behaves as follows. It puts a title at the top, right? It renders true/false, and then you can click it. You can select it. You can say, you can select true/false. It highlights it. Right? And then you can grade it. You can say grade, and it'll actually grade it for you on the browser. It's not going to go back to the server or anything like that. On the browser has whether the answer is correct, right? Remember, in the questions, right? The true/false knows what the right answer is, true, right? In the multiple choice, it knows what the correct answer is. So depending on what you chose, it can highlight the question you chose, and then it could also highlight the right answer as well, right? If you got it right, okay, it makes it a check mark. It says, yeah, good. If you got it wrong, right, it's going to render as an X. And this is all on the client side. This is all on the client side. So for instance, here, if you select true, right, the right answer, and you say grade, it says a check mark. See that? It puts a check mark saying, yeah, you got it right. If you select false, your answer is false, and you say grade, okay, it puts an X on it saying you got it wrong, and it highlights, it highlights your answer as wrong, right, with an X next to it, and then it highlights the correct answer as green. Okay, and same thing with the multiple choice question, right? It first renders the multiple choice as follows, with the title at the top, right? And then if you chose the right answer and you say grade, right, it shows a check mark. If you say select the wrong answer and you say grade, it highlights the correct answer, and highlights marks you as your answer being correct, puts it in red, highlights it as red, and then shows the X on the top right. Okay. All right. Yeah, that's the assignment for this week. So you're going to be creating a Node.js server that contains a service, controls a controller, right, and that represent quizzes and questions. And then from the client, right, you're going to be interacting with this Node.js server, right, to render these UIs. I'm going to get you started on at least one of the questions, and we're gonna get you as far as we can on Wednesday, right? So if you want to get started implementing the server, which I think you have enough information to start the server, we'll work on the client on Wednesday. One word about the repository. So this is going to be in a separate repository, but there's a question in the chat. For P2, how should we set up a meeting? Oh, the meetings for P2, the TAs are going to set that up, right? They're going to set up a spreadsheet where folks can register for meeting with them, and they're going to put a whole bunch of time slots where they're going to be available, and you're going to pick out a time slot. It's going to be a week-long demo. Well, you're going to take 30 minutes, but they're going to make available, slots throughout the week so that you can register and go there. So the and that should happen, I think, this week, right, or next week, I forget. So you can do a demo to what you got so far. All right, a word on the repository. So you're gonna make this available in a separate repository. So I'm going to I just want to make sure that when you are going to push this, let me stop this. So in the terminal here, make sure that you initialize the repository. Say git init. Okay. Make sure that you have a file here called file dot starts with a dot git ignore, and make sure that that file has the following node_modules, that has this directory. See that? We do not want to direct that directory to go and end up in Git. Okay, we don't want that. It's a huge directory. It's got tons of stuff in there. We do not want that in there. Okay. All right. Also, put in there .idea. We don't need that in the repository either. So .idea. And then you can commit this into a new repository and follow the naming convention, right? The repository should be called something like this: WebDev SP21 yada 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 server Node.js. Right, so now we can say git status, then git add everything, git commit, first commit, and then you can push it to GitHub. Let's see, there's a question on the chat. Hey professor, I saw in module you implemented login in Node.js. What should we use in our project? Wait, I saw in module you implemented login in Node.js. What should we use for the project? You could use whatever you want, either Java or Node.js. Yeah, either one is fine. We did take a look at it last week or the week before using Java with register and profile and login. And we'll talk about that a little further. And I'll demo that a little more in Java and in Node.js, so you can look at a bit and contrast the implementation on both. Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you.
Hi.
Yeah, Celine, just reach out and we'll talk about quiz 6.
Hi, Professor. Can we ask a problem about our own project?
Yeah, no, not now. I have another class.
Okay.
I need to run.